How's it going, everybody? Cloudy here, your favorite Korean immersion learning YouTuber. And today, I'm going to talk about the big one. I'm talking about the 12-month, 1-year celebration. I don't know if I want to call it a celebration. It's a milestone of time that, we like to put things into neat little units. And a year's time is significant, always has been. Make one revolution around the sun, and I've been doing Korean immersion learning for that whole time. So I've done it every single day for the last year. So I wanted to take the time to put a little more effort than I was originally planning. I actually did shoot a video a week ago when I had my last day off from work. I went to the park, had a selfie stick. I just walked around the park rambling about stuff. There was a girl who was practicing throwing her javelin on one side of the park. She showed up while I was shooting, and I decided to try to steer clear from her and walk around. The whole video was unstructured, and maybe it was kind of fun, but I didn't touch on a lot of the things that I felt like would be useful for people to hear. And ultimately, being a 1 year, I figured this is the kind of video that maybe people would want to watch to see how long to see what kind of progress somebody made in 1 year's time. So I collected my thoughts, I wrote them down in a document, and I made a bunch of like bullet points. It's a lot, so I think this is going to be a long one. I won't try to spend too much longer than it needs to be. But I also asked on a couple of the Discord servers that I'm in if there was any random questions that somebody had that they think would be good for a 1 year update. And I got a couple of questions, so I'm going to answer those at the end. So stay tuned for that if you really want to hear it all. But other than that, let's just get started. So I'm going to start the video off with a brief overview of what Refold is, immersion learning, and what I've been doing, just for context, in case there's anybody seeing this for the first time or they are wanting to get a crash course. Maybe maybe I'll share this with a family member or a friend or something to show what I've been up to for the last year. So Refold is immersion-based language learning, and immersion in this sense doesn't mean going to the country and surrounding yourself. It means creating an environment at home where you are immersed in your target language. Your target language being the language you want to learn, right? You're aiming for it. That's the target. And I am learning Korean. And what this means for me is primarily I get as much input as is reasonable or possible. Maybe it's even a little bit unreasonable, but I am just doing it as much as I can for the most part. Now there are some slow days, but maybe I'll get into that a little bit later. So that's the main idea, is you want to read a lot, you want to watch a lot of shows, you want to listen throughout the day where possible. Like instead of listening to a podcast or listening to music, I listen to Korean. I still listen to some music, though it's just mainly Korean music. But the idea is you just want to create as big of an environment as you can that's full of Korean. And then that's also supplemented by some grammar study, a little bit of grammar study. I think with Korean, it's very important to look at it and either read through quickly a bunch of grammar stuff without doing a lot of exercises and stuff, or to constantly be looking up, as you learn the basics, be looking up the conjugations and learn what things mean, because the way Korean is structured, you'll have a noun and an adjective, and that adjective is or the verb is conjugated in a certain way to give a certain inflection, carry its own meaning. So it's important to learn some grammar. However, it's not a complete focus. Most language learning methods start with a grammar focus, and they want you to drill that over and over again and build up a linear path of foundational grammar concepts, one after the other, end to end, and you learn one, you master it, and then you go to the next one. In theory, this sounds like a good idea, and maybe it is for some people, but I think for me, it's much better to go for this wide angle approach where you cover a lot of it, cover a lot of ground, get a lot of input, and you develop strong intuitions for how the language should sound, how the language is used, what kinds of things are said in which instances. And I think that's a large strength. And then also coming up with just like an intuition for, largely it just makes it so much easier to break everything down. Also, your ear gets really primed to be able to hear full speed, natural Korean speech spoken by Korean natives for a Korean native audience. And so it's natural stuff that they would, normally be able to comprehend like normal. It's nothing weird for them. This also has some effect on like kind of how you identify in your learning as well. But maybe I'll touch on that in a little while. That's sort of a different tangent. Anyway, some grammar study, and then also Anki. Anki is a flashcard system that is designed to give increasing intervals in between each time you see a word or a card. And so if you look at the card and you get it, it will give that specific card an increased interval, so it's longer until you see it the next time. That's 1 day, 3 days, maybe 5 days, 12 days, a month, increasing intervals each time. Those are just, I don't know the exact numbers that mine's using right now, but that's just, an idea. That's what Refold is. Sorry for any of you who follow what I do or follow Refold. I wanted to cover that a little bit just so that we're all on the same page. And then I thought I would also go over my timeline, like how I got here. Briefly, I'll restate, as I've stated in earlier videos, that I got interested in Korean culture from playing Osu, which is a rhythm game that has a lot of Japanese music, music from anime, and some Korean music. And I heard some Korean pop music, and I was kind of blown away. I really loved it. Continued to listen to more and more, then watched some Korean TV shows with English subtitles. Really enjoyed reading the humor and the energy of the hosts of the shows I was watching, and just became more and more interested just naturally, and eventually I decided I needed to learn the language. And I was watching a reality TV show that was auditioning a bunch of people to try to make it into a K-pop group called Produce 48 to later become Eyes One, who just disbanded, actually, interestingly. So yeah, the group lasted longer than that. I was watching it pretty late into their timeline. Anyway, I was watching this show, and I was watching a lot of Korean content from K-pop idols, and then just other stuff, variety show content. And I saw these K-pop idols from Japan who were just learning Korean while they were doing all of this, other stuff. And now I fully understand that, Korean has a lot of similarities with Japanese in some of its early structure. So you kind of get a head start if you know Japanese. Plus, if you've had a lot of exposure to it before, a lot of, to the music and to the culture and everything. And also culturally, they're very similar. So in a lot of ways. So there are a lot of crossover. Basically, you get a head start if you know Japanese, or if you are Japanese, an even bigger head start. But I wasn't really thinking about that, and I thought, man, these girls who are learning all of these songs and getting better at singing and dancing and training every day, and they're also learning Korean, I have no excuse. I was sitting at home just kind of doing whatever, and I decided I was going to give myself 4 months to learn, 4 months not to learn it, but 4 months of dedicated time to see if I wanted to continue with it. So anyway, I made that decision and I started doing some whatever, looked online, found some Talk to Me in Korean resources for free, and fiddled around, found some Jama NYC videos where he's learning Spanish really fast, and I thought it was kind of goofy. It was like an experiment he was doing, but he used Anki, to learn a bunch of words, and I was thinking, oh well, I guess I definitely need to learn words. Obviously, I hadn't really given it much thought of how I was going to do that. I didn't know. Started a little bit with Anki, and then I found Matt versus Japan's videos on immersion learning. He created the mass immersion approach along with his business partner Yoga, and they created like a framework that was built off of AJAT. This is a lot of information if you're new, but if you're not new, this is rehashing stuff you've seen already. Anyway, AJAT was just an immersion method based off of a previous immersion method. It was just everything's built off of everything, iterated. The current iteration seemed applicable for Korean, and I happened to stumble across a comment somebody made on Reddit about learning Korean using the MIA, and so the mass immersion approach. I thought, okay, I can do this, and I found that person started a subreddit and then started a Discord. I joined. It only had like 10 people in it at the time, I think 8 people. Anyway, that's when I started immersion learning 1 year ago. 1 year ago, a week ago. I missed the actual day because I shot that one video and I wasn't happy with it. I thought you guys deserved something a bit better put together. So yeah, that's when my immersion learning journey started. Before that, I learned about 40 words. A bunch of them were fruits, probably, and a lot of them are just English words. Pineapple, just English loan words. Anyway, I learned a tiny bit of grammar. I didn't learn much in those first month and a half. I was watching a lot of videos on how to learn. I watched more of that than I actually watched content for how to learn. So anyway, there was some time before where I was learning how to learn, and I didn't learn a lot of the actual language. So when I took it seriously, that's when I started doing 10 cards a day and doing immersion and just watching stuff without English subtitles, right? So I figured out how to do all that. I made the video of me just rambling. I was sleep deprived at the time, and I didn't know what I was talking about, and I was just kind of rambling about my thoughts. I wasn't used to being on the camera as much, and I made this long 45-minute video about how I had planned on doing this immersion learning and what led up to that. So anyway, I'm trying to save you the time to not have to watch all of that and all of the stuff in the beginning. You can start here and you get a pretty good idea of what I've been up to. So I was figuring out my process, figuring out how I was going to learn grammar, asking other people what they had done, asking people who weren't doing immersion learning but who were really serious what they were doing, and trying to find my own balance. And I mostly listened to shows and used Evita's vocabulary deck to learn the first 600, 700 words that I knew. So I was listening all the time. I have, headphones. I bought them right before I started the MIA stuff. I think I had a different pair for a while. And so I was able to listen to this at work, have one in my ear, and instead of listening to music or was listening to whatever, I was just listening to Korean. I didn't understand much of it, but after a solid week and a half of listening to it and then watching some shows at my house and then doing a little bit of grammar study and learning a few words each day, I was beginning to be able to parse the sounds and understand things. And so that was when I first thought, okay, there's something to this immersion stuff, just jumping in the deep end with no understanding and trying to come up with a better understanding of the language as you immerse. So that was the idea. And I started to see okay, maybe there's something to it. Obviously, before I get any further, if you want to learn about the details, go to refold.la and check it out. There's some Discord servers there. I don't get paid to say that, but I'm involved with them a lot. You can learn exactly how I started all this and everything. So yeah, I got my routine started. I made a video on how to study Korean with the mass immersion approach because I realized that there's a lot of questions some people had. It was new. There's not a lot of people who had done it for Korean, and nobody had really put together a Korean starter guide. You know, most of the guides you'd seen were from people doing Japanese, or some people had created a little bit of information on how to do Chinese. But for Korean, we were kind of just making it up as we went along, reading the websites and the information and learning from what the Japanese learners were doing and just trying to apply it to a Korean. So I made a video on how to do that. And I think it brought a lot of Korean learners into the Immersion community, which has been really cool. It was cool to be a part of, like, bringing other people. After I worked out a bunch of the kinks of starting, it was cool to help other people kind of push past that and get into it. And then I also I made some more video content, and I started a Twitch channel where I was going to be streaming, and I met some other streamers, and I was trying to learn Korean while I was streaming, and working full time. So when you work 40 hours, sometimes 48, depending on the season, or 50, and then you also want to learn Korean for like 4 hours in your free time every day, and then you also want to make YouTube videos, and then you also want to make a Twitch stream twice a week because, so that it's like regular, but sometimes with the changing schedule. And then I also had to like take care of all of my daily or weekly, chores and errands and everything. It was a lot of fun, but it was too much to do all at once. And in order to maintain the type of hours I wanted to put into studying Korean, I had to drop off the Twitch channel, and I stopped planning out and making YouTube videos that weren't just like these quick updates that I could just shoot and be done. So yeah, that was that. So, and then part of the listening, or part of the Anki vocab stuff that I did after my 700 or so Evita words, I got Morphman running thanks to some help with some people in the community. Ryanus from the LTI server, he put together a working form of Morphman for Korean, and I used that to help look through the content that I had made from shows of subtitles, and pick out sentences for me where I knew all of the words except for one, and it would try to feed that to me in that order. And as you learn that new word, it updates in the database, so that gets added to your known words. Anyway, it's supposed to be automated and it's supposed to help, but really it's kind of a buggy program to start with, and then the Korean support was fairly experimental. And I think there were some issues with the way I had it set up or the way it was running or something. I never quite got it to work for me. And I was also using a pre-made deck to help me come up with, learning new words. I used a pre-made deck that was from sentences based on, fairly common vocabulary. And I had such a poor time trying to work through the bugs on Morphman, and then the pre-made deck with you also using Morphman to order that in a way. The pre-made deck, it's so boring that it kind of sucked to use. So I stopped doing that. And then at that point, I was, I think maybe 6 or 7 months in. I can't remember exactly. I looked at what I was doing, where I was, and I thought, like, okay, how am I going to move forward? I need to get back to my fundamentals, and I need to focus on a system that's sustainable and that I can continue to build on and work off of and make progress. So I just focused on trying to read. I read the Yante reading textbooks, which, found some scanned PDF copies online, if you know what I mean. Because the book was available for like $100 or something on the internet. And I'm not going to pay for that. If it's not available, I don't really have a problem with pirating it. That was not $100 from a first party source either. They just didn't sell it, and then you can just find these copies for like way too much money. Anyway, that helped me ease into reading. It's a graded reader. It starts off with like 4 short lines and then builds up, using vocabulary and a little grammar. It was good practice to get into it. Kept at it, and then somewhere along the line, 8 or 9 months in, MIA split, and it became like a Yoga went on to create his own thing, and Matt went on to create his own thing. And the thing that Matt helped started with his new business partner Ethan was Refold. And I was asked to, I'd been talking a little bit with those guys, and I was asked to start the Korean server just because I was active in the community and expressed my desire to help out with things. And my intention was that I was hoping that by creating these servers, and this is also what they were wanting to do. They wanted to get a lot of people in and really push out the method and get a lot of new people doing it and build a strong community where people could share ideas and learn about things. And so anyway, we started that. They did everything. I just kind of started the Korean server and helped kind of start that up, build up the channels, help kind of set the tone for the culture there. And that was really cool, being heavily involved again with getting new people into it after I made the starting video, and then done a little bit of advertising for the method just naturally through having my YouTube channel, I guess. Anyway, that brings us to after the refold things started settling down. I was just trying to improve my process. Continued reading. I started reading webtoons, and I think the reading at this point really began to pick up speed. I also started reading Ollie's Korean Korean Stories for Language Learners. That's a book that he released around December of 2020, or at least that's when it released in paperback. Anyway, I bought it on paperback and then actually also a digital copy too, so I could read it on my tablet that I recently got. Okay, where are we now? Yeah, a lot of intensive reading study with that. And then in discussing with some people how to kind of move and accelerate beyond that, I started practicing doing a little bit of extensive reading. And that meant not worrying as much about lookups and understanding every single part, but trying to follow the story and pick up and make some guesses on what some things might mean, and just kind of, with the understanding that you know that it's a guess, but just try to exercise your intuition with it. And I was a little hesitant to do some of that because, it felt like I should just learn everything. The words are there. I had done free flow listening, extensively to shows, but not a lot with reading. But doing that a little bit with reading and choosing some content that I understood a little bit more, some webtoon content that was easy, it helped me really get practice with the stuff that I did know, so that I could move through it more comfortably and focus then on the stuff that I didn't know at all. Introducing some of that was really helpful to me. I found that doing some extensive listening or reading, and this isn't a refold only thing. Ollie talks about it. Krashen talks about it. The Steve Kaufman, the refold guys, and other people in the community, people who have taken the language to a high level, done some different amounts of this, focusing on the more comprehensible sentences in a book, and just kind of letting some groups of words just go and not worry about it too much. So it's not a radical idea, but it really helped make space in my understanding for new things. It helped me flush some of that out. So I found that really helpful. I'm sticking with that as a really helpful thing. I've had in some discussions, I had some people criticize that, thinking that it's a stupid waste of time. But from my experience, in line with the rest of the way that I'm doing this, and with the massive amounts of input, lots of input, it really does help keep things moving. There's a time and place for both. You want to spend some time reading extensively, and then also spend some time reading intensively. I think getting some extensive reading helps flush things out, and then intensively helps get new things to work on and focus on, because you don't really have to do it all at once. I think some people get the idea that you have to that the language is scarce, that you have to attack every single little bite of it and make sense of every single little chunk before you go on to the next one. When it's not like because you skip something you stop learning. You're still learning things. You just skip over something and learn the next thing instead. You're still learning the entire time, but you just get a little bit of comprehension, a little bit of practice, understanding things, and getting information, and processing it in real time. And that takes practice. I think some people are naturally better at it than others due to different circumstances. I think that learning a second language to a high level, or learning a third language to a high level, and then also being really young, are both advantages to being able to soak up more information faster. And so then maybe it makes sense for somebody to do that. But I think for a general, I consider myself to be a somewhat normal middle ground average learner. I never thought I was good with learning. I think that it makes sense. All of these different parts of the refold method make sense when you understand which goal each individual part has, and they all work together in a holistic way. So anyway, that's a little bit of a tangent, but I'm a proponent of spending some time free flow reading and doing a few lookups here and there to help move things along. So anyway, I eventually picked up the Migaku add-ons through their Patreon, and that was Yoga, who used to work with Matt, went on to create a mostly add-on and tools-focused approach to the language learning thing, and that's how they were monetizing their operation, getting Patreon supporters in exchange for access to their add-ons earlier than anybody else while they're in development, basically. So that enabled me to improve my mining from shows. And basically, it doesn't matter which tools you use, as long as you are finding a way that works for you to access the subtitles and be able to copy stuff. You can use language learning with Netflix. It works just fine. You don't have to, Migaku automatically adds a screenshot, and you can use the dictionary to automatically add stuff to your fields. It's a very inclusive ecosystem of tools. It's not perfect, but it makes things a little bit easier. But it's really unnecessary as long as you have a way to copy the text of the subtitles of the shows and put it on your Anki cards. That's the most important thing. Anything else beyond that is just fluff. It can help, or it might not help much, or it could be a little bit easier or a little bit, but it doesn't ultimately matter. Anyway, I found a good workflow that worked with my different things, and then I also got a tablet so that I could read on the go. And I use Moonreader Plus. I think it was like a $5 app or something. I can highlight something and then have all of my stuff exported. I like the way that it displays pages. So it's a nice break. If I need a change of environment, I don't have to just read on my screen. I can go and read on this e-reader and then just sync up. I can just have it send all of the notes to like a notepad on my computer, just, upload it. And then once a week or whenever I get around to it, I can just go in and update all of the sentences, add them to my Anki, and continue to mine stuff there. I've been focusing on really making it easy to immerse. Another thing I did was I got a Chromecast so that I could just play stuff on my TV. And then I also use a Steam Link and a Steam controller to mirror my computer's environment on my TV and use the Steam controller. I have custom mapped buttons and everything for doing dictionary lookups, typing, although I haven't actually done Korean typing. That's probably doable, but anyway, I can edit cards, like copy and paste, which is most of what I do. I can copy and paste and create cards with the Magaku extension just using, my Steam controller, using these touchpads to control the mouse, and then all the buttons on the back, everywhere on the front. Anyway, that's been fun. I've been focusing on trying to remove barriers to making cards so I can continue my Anki habit, because I really want to lean in and make sure that I'm being consistent with adding new cards. So once I got all that, I started watching Pokemon Sun and Moon, and I was blown away that after all the work that I put in for months and months and months, this is like 10 months in now, I was watching this show. Yes, it's for like 8 and up audiences. I was watching the Korean dub because I had Korean matching subtitles, and I understood so much of it that I was just blown away, because I'd felt like immersing in content made for adults, it's really easy to lose sight of how good your comprehension is. And all of the reading I did really helped. So that made it really easy to binge the show. And if I felt like I was a kid again, watching Pokemon, it takes a lot of concentration and focusing on trying to follow the story, which Pokemon is a great way to do that. And having a high level of comprehension means that when you come across a new word, it really slips into place, and you get to focus on the subtleties of how they're saying things, which grammar they're using where, and you get a lot of more nuanced sense of the language. And I think it's really being able to finally immerse in content that is comprehensible was just a huge boon to my, first of all, my confidence in the method, and then in my confidence in what I learned so far, but also my confidence in my ability to acquire the language. Because I think that it's a lot harder. You see progress slower. It's a lot more scattered when it's too far above your head. So then I watched 140 episodes of of Pokemon. And then I watched almost 2 seasons of what was it, Avatar: The Last Airbender in the Korean dub, and that's probably like a 9 and up kids show, maybe 10 and up. I don't know. Even though it is also for kids, it's just tougher. They use more nuanced language and slightly longer sentences. Pokemon is a lot of shorter sentences. So it was a nice jump up, and I was able to continue to mine words from that, hundreds of words from both of the shows. And then I started reading Harry Potter Book 1, and that was also huge for me because so far it had been so hard to try and find stuff that was comprehensible that I can understand. But when you constantly are trying to read and you're constantly putting in the effort, reading webtoons that are too far above your level and doing all of this, eventually you reach a point where you come across something and it's in your reach. So Harry Potter was a good choice for me for a couple of reasons. The translation is pretty good. It's a newer translation from 2017. There was one earlier that was not good, apparently. I haven't read it. But also, I read Harry Potter in English, the first book, probably like 5 times, maybe 6 times, because I would, as they were coming out, I loved to read the ones before. And before, when I knew that the next book was coming out in a month or something, I would read the other books leading up to that. So yeah, I know the story so well that as I'm reading it, I understand where I am in the story all the time. So I'm not ever lost. If I lose pace on understanding a sentence, I pick it up on the next sentence. So if you have a book that you loved in English and there's any way to get it in Korean, I think that's a real smart way to go. Or if you're learning a different language, there's that. The other thing I started doing recently was mining more of the monolingual dictionary. And this is something that is often talked about in the process of people figuring out their first year, moving into the intermediate type sphere of learning. That's the monolingual dictionary, because ideally if you can understand a monolingual dictionary and the definitions in that, when you look up a word, you can look up its definition in Korean and then understand it through Korean words and understand the Korean phrases, and it helps spend less time with English. It helps you get more Korean immersion time and helps you start to build up concepts in your head with a Korean understanding. And I think it's useful, but I knew that it wasn't going to be something that I could just turn on and off, because there's no use in looking up a word if you can't understand the definitions. So what I started doing was just looking through them, reading through them, and using definitions that I could understand. I did that for a while. But then more recently, I started looking up words in the monolingual definition and using those on my cards, using those definitions. But if there was a word or two I didn't understand, I would add that word to Anki. And then of the original word that I was trying to understand, I would just look it up. I would just use the English definition. So in this way, I started constantly working on moving towards that monolingual definition, the ability, because you want to understand all the words that are like, size, shape, form, frequency, direction, and these kind of description words that classify things, because that's a lot of the type of language that a dictionary uses, is it tries to classify what something is and describes its form and its function. That has been really successful, I think. I know enough now that I can continually mine those. The other addition I made so many changes in the last 2 months of my learning. It's been kind of crazy, but they've all been really positive. The other thing I started doing was going back to adding more individual words. I had avoided using individual vocab words in my Anki cards because I thought that sentences were the ultimate way to go. I still think that. However, now that I've learned quite a bit of Korean, it's getting easier for me to remember the single vocab word cards. That was one of the difficulties that I had, was that it was tough to remember individual vocab. But you get better at it. So now that I'm coming back to it, I can make use of it to keep my number of new Anki cards back up, because they were kind of low for a while. For a few months, I was doing 2 to 5 words a day when I was struggling trying to find my pace. So anyway, I think that's about where we are now. Wow, that's 1 year of immersion learning. A lot can happen. I knew this video was going to be long going in, but maybe you can watch it in parts or something. So, one of the things that I picked up recently was because I had just finished reading through How to Study Korean. I had started it about a month and a half ago, 140 lessons. On most days, I would read a few lessons of that and just slowly work through it. Doing it this time, now that I had my foundations and I'd had some practice reading, everything that I read made so much more sense. And I could imagine examples of where I had heard that before from shows or where I had read it before in context. And then each day I would learn a couple of new things in How to Study Korean, and then I would read, and inevitably, because everything on that website comes up, I would be able to see that and get a chance to comprehend it, that day and a couple, the next day. Excuse me. So I finished doing that, and I wanted to kind of continue studying a little bit. I started using the Hanja lessons, which just go over the Chinese roots for a lot of the words that are in the Korean language. And they have Chinese characters associated with them. And so then, you'll have one like te, and it has like a certain shape, but you don't really necessarily need to memorize the shapes. You just need to know that te oftentimes means like big. And so reading a lot of these examples, because I was already familiar with a lot of Korean, I would read like, oh yeah, this root means this, and then it would list off a bunch of words, and I could remember other words like that. I'll use that, and it helped me to start creating a framework for a lot of the language using these Chinese roots, the Hanja, that made it a lot more easy to start. It made it a little bit easier to learn some newer vocab. So it increased my capacity for learning new vocab, because now I'm more aware of the roots after having learned some of them. So learning the Hanja has been kind of neat. Let's see, where are we next? I'm just checking out my notes. A couple of weeks ago, I got a little bit curious about Japanese. Part of it was I was snooping around on the Japanese server, the Japanese Refold server, to check out their onboarding process for new people. They are a lot busier, and they had a huge already existing community of learners using language immersion methods to learn Japanese, because of the previous methods focused mostly on Japanese. So there was already a big community, and people who've been doing it for a long time, and a stronger culture there, and also a lot more volume. About, a lot more. Thousands of people were going through there instead of the hundreds coming to like the Korean server, which was the next biggest. So I was curious about what their process was like, but then also I had been kind of toying this idea in my mind that it would be fun to learn Japanese after I was pretty decent with Korean. I'm under no illusion. I know that starting Japanese now would be very difficult, and it would make my Korean progress slow down significantly significantly, and I wouldn't make the same kind of progress with Japanese as if I would just wait. So, but I was still curious, and I figured, a little bit, like a few days, a little bit of time, for a week, a day, like, 20 minutes or half an hour or an hour, kind of going through this beginner process with Japanese would give me an insight to what it's like to start a language again. It's been a year, so I almost forgot what is it like to start learning a language not knowing anything. And it's a pretty humbling thing to remind yourself what it's like to not understand a language when you hear it. You hear people talk in Japanese anime. It sounds so fast, and you don't understand where one word starts or stops. And that's what it was like in Korean. And then I learned the kana. I learned, hiragana, katakana, and was trying to get an idea of like how, I could maybe start working on a starter guide for Korean. Anyway, I also started learning, I made the decision to start learning the kanji, the Japanese kanji, using the Remember the Kanji deck. Well, specifically, recognition, remember the kanji, because I learned that if Korean uses that character, it's going to mean roughly the same thing in Japanese that it does in Korean. And that most of what Remember the Kanji is for is being able to read kanji and see them as meaning and understand the individual parts, because they're all built, each kanji is usually built from smaller pieces put together. And so understanding how to do that, would be kind of a head start if I eventually did decide to do Japanese, maybe a year from now. I don't know. I don't know what things will hold for me, so it's hard to say at this point. But at the very least, I thought that learning the kanji would help me understand the characters better, and so that when I looked up hanja in the Korean dictionary, I could see the meaning better, and maybe, by putting it on my cards, just adding another way to understand the card and build up that understanding with the Chinese roots. So I started doing that. That was only a couple of weeks ago, or a week now when I actually started Remember the Kanji. Anyway, another thing I started to do is I started listening to condensed audio again. So what condensed audio is, for those of you who don't know, it's audio of a show where everything but the speaking parts are cut out. So it uses the subtitle timing to chop out the audio and discard everything that isn't associated with a subtitle line. And I used this a lot when I was learning in the first few months. I would listen to some of the same dramas like almost every day, depending on which ones I was listening to, and I found it really helpful to get a lot of spaced repetition essentially with these shows. I would learn words from them and then listen to them a few days later and recognize the stuff that I had just kind of barely surface level learned in Anki. And once you recognize it in the wild, then it's pretty much almost always acquired. Once you're able to see it and know its meaning, it sinks in. So that's where the acquisition process happens. And it works really well to have condensed audio. So I started doing that again. And so I touched lightly on how I had begun doing the getting my grammar, going through this grammar resource again, how to study Korean. And since I finished that, I also began more proactively making sure that when I come across something in my reading, that I treat it more like a vocab and I look up what it means, even though with almost all of them, I've looked it up. I know I've seen it before. I know I've seen it sometimes dozens of times, so I don't always remember. And that's kind of the frustrating part of learning the language, is that you'll see something dozens of times and maybe you'll look it up dozens of times and it just won't stick. However, sometimes those dozen are enough that you needed to do them to get you up to that, 15th time where it sticks. So sometimes it just takes time. It takes a lot of repetition. Some words are easy. But I've been making an effort to make sure that my understanding is better when I'm done reading something, my understanding of the grammar, and not just focusing on vocab. So one of the benefits of, I wanted to talk a little bit about one of the benefits of, because I've also been making sure that recently that I want to make sure that my understanding of how a word is pronounced is accurate. And so when I look up a word, I look up the pronunciation table. And I think I generally feel lucky in that I'm one of the people who managed to hear the difference between double consonants when I was first learning. And, I looked up some videos on how they are pronounced and what differentiates them from regular consonants and tensed consonants, and then different pronunciations of those consonants depending on where they fall in a word and everything. Anyway, I want to make sure that I understand it consciously when I learn a word, so that, because there's some different things with a word. There are long vowels, and these are vowels that they pronounce longer than the rest of the vowels in the word, or sometimes a word that will be spelt with a single consonant and you pronounce it like a double consonant, or sometimes a previous consonant carries over and makes like a previous H, or sometimes not, or I say H, like the higut or whatever it is, the H kind of sound will carry over and make a consonant aspirated. And then there's also the sound change rules with the batchim, and that is when it's all kind of follows a set of consistent rules, but they come up in different ways depending on their usage. But one of the things is that I think I'm making sure that I understand the pronunciation well, but I feel like because of all of the input that I did and all the listening, I don't always, like, my intuition is spooky sometimes. I feel like I feel like this should just be pronounced kind of like this, and I look up the pronunciation, and sure enough, it's like that. I don't think that I'm special in that way, but that because of a lot of the listening that I did, I built up. It seems like I built up a pretty good intuition for how things are pronounced. And I think that really helps. Also, I did learn, the rules on a number of different times for sound changes, including explanations of, examples of specific examples of those rule changes and reading through them. So yeah, that's one of the things I was going to touch on briefly, was that immersion learning is not a linear path. And traditional learning is like a linear thing. You do one block, you get one block built, and then you build on another one next to that. And each time you add new information, it's like one after the other, and you are trying to get from A to B with building and everything. And the way immersion learning works is that you just create a low resolution picture of a lot of the language, or at least a very large chunk. Not all of it, of course, because you can only immerse in so much. And it's probably better to focus on a smaller chunk, And regular kind of normal entertainment and reading is a pretty good, you don't want to like jump into astrophysics in Korean from the start. That's just, it's not smart, it's not easy, and not really that helpful, I don't think. So you create this low resolution picture from all of the input, and your unconscious mind really does do a lot of work to help you out here. You don't always, I think some people get this idea that learning is a conscious effort only, and that you only learn things when you get your prefrontal cortex engaged and you focus on it and you pick it apart and you classify its pieces, and then it becomes a solidified piece of information and you move on to the next one, and that's how you learn. But I don't necessarily agree with that, and I don't think that that's always going to be the most beneficial way for everybody. And I think most people can benefit from learning things in this broad way, where you create a low resolution picture and you slowly just fine tune and increase the resolution of individual areas over time, and you constantly just kind of get a slowly clearer picture. And then when you do later on focus on one little area, you know how it fits in the context. Oh, sorry, just for whacking you. You know how it fits in the context of the rest of the language. So you have an understanding of how it's supposed to sound, the intuition, where it's used, what kind of uses it would have, implications for like how serious or that's written, or or natural, or like there's so many different things that you obviously don't know it perfectly, but it gives you a better idea. You're more prepared to understand that information if you have a lot of input. So I think that's really what immersion learning is like, is that, but also that can be tough because for somebody who learns things in a linear way, maybe they learn the language like, you learn this thing and you learn that thing and you keep drilling these things over and over again. You practice them and you have you have some firm ground to stand on for your understanding, though it may be narrow, but it feels like you know that well, and you can, and you practice speaking and doing all those things, and you can show your progress like that in a way. But with immersion learning, it's so hard to show your progress because it's spread out. It doesn't mean there's less progress. It means that it's spread out, and that the way that it works is that it will eventually become a clearer picture. And so I think some people, they'll be doing immersion learning for like a year or whatever, and then they'll want to compare their demonstrated ability with somebody who has been practicing specific skills that they developed in a linear fashion. And it's just not a good matchup. I don't think it's always indicative of progress, and that I don't think it's always exactly helpful to judge where you are based on the type of thing that somebody else is doing, somebody else actually practices, but you don't practice. Like speaking. If I were to speak to you right now, I understand a lot of the language, and I understand a lot more than somebody, who like just started, but both of us can't speak. And that's because I've been working so much on this broad picture that I haven't really finalized all of the little details. And I'm in the process of doing that for a small chunk of the language, everyday life, conversational stuff. I read a lot of YouTube comments now and try to figure out what people are saying and the way they're saying it. Anyway, once that is in a higher resolution, I'll feel really comfortable accessing that information. I think I'll be really comfortable accessing all that information and starting to build out a map that makes sense based on all of this input that I've gotten and that I've received. And so there's no reason for me to judge my progress based on somebody who's been only practicing all those patterns and actually been practicing speaking, daily for months, 6 months or whatever. They're going to be able to practice that specific thing better, than I would. So anyway, I don't think that's the other thing for anybody who's watched it this far and doesn't understand the method. We delay speaking until we have a strong understanding. At least that's the guideline, and that's the guideline that I'm following. I'm delaying my speaking until I have a strong understanding of the language in a specific sphere, which includes covering all the basics of the grammar, all the common vocab, so that I can listen to somebody talk about something and understand all of it to a high degree. Or 98% of it, all that they're saying except for a couple of words that I might not know, but being able to understand what they're saying immediately, and I'm not that far off from it. I'm doing all of this preparation by clarifying the grammar and continuing to increase my vocab and covering all of the vocab holes that I have, and finding comprehensible input and reading a lot, because I do want to start practice speaking, and I think that I'll be ready with it for that within, I don't want to put a time frame on it, but at some point within the next year, probably sooner. Now I'm thinking maybe within 6 months or something. I want to start practicing writing and all of that. So I think that'll be good. So yeah, I don't even know how long this is taking, because I can't see the numbers for how long it's been recording. I know this is a long video. My voice is taking a beating. However, I said I would answer a few questions. Some people had some questions for me, so I was going to answer some of those before I close out the video. So from Zephyr Hills on Discord, Zephyr Hills asks, how long daily did I do each thing? And how big is my vocabulary? So how long daily, my routine has changed a little bit, but ideally it was just 15 minutes on Anki, doing my flashcard reps and reading some amount, and then watching some amount, and then listening some amount. Recently I've been shooting for 2 hours reading and 1 to 2 hours of watching a show with Korean subtitles. And then throughout the day, I listen to Korean YouTube or Korean condensed audio. Throughout the day, I mean at work, I'm able to listen in one ear. So that gives me practice on listening. And then when I have time to actually sit down, I use the subtitles or reading, and I use a dictionary, and I have everything set up so that it's nice and seamless and quick, and I can keep moving so that I can follow the story and not spend too much time creating cards. So it's important to keep moving and getting new input and keep pushing forward. If you read 50 pages or you spend 50 pages in a day, I'm not spending 50 pages. I'm not reading 50 pages in a day, but say you learn 50 pages in a day or spent that same amount on one paragraph. What's going to be better for you? The 50 pages. You cover a lot more things through repetition, and that's better. So anyway, yeah, that's too long of an answer, but right now I like to read for 2 hours and read subtitles while I watch a show and listen to a show for an hour or two. On my days off, I like to do more than that, because I have more time. And then you asked about my vocab size. It's hard for me to gauge because I don't have a strong way. I deleted about 1,500 Anki cards from the pre-made deck that I was repping. So I learned a lot of those words, or I half learned a lot of them, but I hated repping them, so I deleted them. And then I have also learned stuff from just reading, and a little bit picked up, from watching shows. I have about 2,200 cards in Anki right now after deleting 1,500 cards, and then I've picked up words that I've read that I haven't put in Anki because I knew them, so I don't. If I could read them or hear them and understand them, I don't need to put it into Anki. It's an extra rep I don't need. So 3,000, 4,000-ish, I don't know. It's somewhere in there. It's hard to say because there are some semi-common words that I don't know when I see them. But I know some half-common words. Anyway. So then the next person, French Weeb, asked, what's my subjective comprehension level increase based on hours consumed? So based on a certain amount of time, how, what's my comprehension difference like? So I think comprehension, it's not reliant just on hours alone, because it's going to be different. The makeup of those is going to be different with if you're looking up a lot of words, or you're doing 10 new Anki reps or 10 new Anki cards a day in addition to those hours, or or any mixture of that, or if you're reading more or watching more. And I think reading for vocab gains is a little bit better. So I could just speak roughly to to where I was at more in like my perception of the language, because I feel like hours to comprehension gains aren't exactly 1-to-1. Although obviously the more hours you do, the more your comprehension is, I think, generally speaking. I hope that wasn't too confusing, but I thought I would say about 100 hours of listening, I could hear individual patterns of the language and like pick apart the differences fairly well, so that I was prepared to be able to like listen and hear things in the language. And in about 500 hours, 400, 500 hours, I started getting fine-tuned to the emotional communication and like the intonation of people's speech. I noticed at some point that early on, I was getting confused sometimes when hearing people's intonation patterns and speech, like the singing nature of like the rise and fall of the pitch and like the way they shape sentences, and also including the timbre of their voice changing, when somebody expresses themselves and expresses emotional information. I would kind of misread that sometimes, like not really get it. But by the time 500 hours hit, I was able to be much more accurate with the types of emotional information that was encoded in what they were saying. So I built up those maps of intonation in my mind through exposure, that it made a lot more sense. That was also at about the critical mass where I was able to really, really, really pick up and hear and understand words that I knew in the language as they come through full speed. And so that was like a barrage of like just word, space, blah, 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 word, blah, blah, word, blah, blah, word, blah, 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 word, blah, blah, blah. And so it's like that became hard to concentrate on almost, because it's very distracting, just like how much information you're getting suddenly. It reaches like a critical mass point where it's just like information, rather than just, oh, I know that word, and then wait, oh, I know that word. So yeah. And then about 1,000 hours, I think, yeah, my intuition on the intonation further refined, and also the pronunciation, like I was talking about earlier, it started to become more understandable. And then I think that's 1,000 hours is also about where I could understand most of like easier content. I'm including some passive listening hours in there, because the passive listening that I did was, a lot of it was just doing repetitive tasks at work and just hearing the patterns and trying to understand the information that I knew, and trying to make sure that I could catch a word that I had read the definition of or done a rep for, and then understand what it meant in the context of the thing. Basically being able to follow information. So yeah, I hope that was not too confusing. Vulcan asked, I'd be interested in your assessment of how far you think you are in hours, months from starting to output. Anything you've done differently starting from scratch, whether it's been at all difficult to maintain motivation, and how your motivation has fluctuated or changed along the way. So those are some good questions that I'll try to answer. How far am I away from output? Like I said, probably 5 months before I'll start practicing more. And I'm going to ease into that. It's not just going to be, I'm not just doing like a flip of the switch. Like, I'm going to start accessing the stuff that I know well and just start easing into it. And making sure that I have my fundamentals right. I'm not in a rush, and practicing speaking isn't exactly going to help me learn more. It will just help me speak more. So right now it's not a barrier to learning, so it's not a huge priority. But I will keep learning and get better at that, hopefully within 4-6 months. Anything I would have done differently? I would have not done a pre-made deck after doing a starter vocab deck. I would have if I would have done things differently, I would have figured out mining better, and also tried to do a few more individual vocab cards. I wish I wasn't so worried about doing even just a couple vocab words a day, or one vocab card a day. I think that would have helped me push through that acquisition process faster. And then I also probably would have not used Morphman, and because I think it helps you when you're not using Morphman, it helps you stay engaged with what you're doing, so that you can look for things that you almost understand better. I feel like it's more engaging, and you tend to fall. I fell into a trap of like watching some stuff that I didn't necessarily want to watch because it had subtitles, or not watching things because it didn't have software subtitles that you could select, in a menu. And so I was limiting the kinds of content that I wanted to watch and getting really frustrated and spending a lot of time searching for that content, making subs to SRS decks. It's kind of a pain. But eventually I pushed through it. So ultimately, I survived and I made it to where I am. So I'm not too worried about it. I'd also focus less on content that I didn't like. I think it's really important to just not spend too much time on stuff that you don't like. You can spend some, but you don't have to force yourself day in and day out to constantly do stuff that isn't fun, because the more negative emotions you associate with immersion, the less fun it's going to be. You want to continually rejuvenate your enthusiasm for it by constantly going back to material that you want to do. You associate a lot of good feelings with learning the language. You'll naturally want to do it more and more. So that's how I've been able to, do that. That's how I've been able to, continue and rejuvenate my motivation. Which was, I think, another of your questions. So, also getting rid of Anki cards that aren't fun. I talked about that. I deleted 1,500 Anki. Actually, no. I deleted 1,500 cards that I had done, and then I deleted 500 that I hadn't even gotten to in the deck. So, yeah. I deleted all those. I think a lot of those I had actually already repped from vocab. But anyway. From the Discord, I wrote a note from the Discord user formerly known as Bijou. Okay, you know who you are. I don't remember what your current username is, and it's probably different depending on which server you are. But I know you used to go by Bijou. Asked me about the lows and doubts and how I overcame them. So yeah, about 7-8 months in, I was transitioning away from a lot of the beginner vocab and away from Morphman. I was trying to get my routine together. And I was still trying to play vocab bingo and doing a little bit of grammar study, and not a lot was sticking. Reading was still hard. It was hard to have fun with it anyway. And I kind of expected to be better by that point. It's hard to do something for 6-7 months and still feel like you suck at it. Even though that's the reality. I think anybody, would agree that you kind of still suck. When you're at that time of any skill. I think it takes, if you're gonna learn an instrument, if you're gonna play guitar in 6 months, you're gonna suck. You maybe be able to play some songs, but you won't be able to hear a song and then play it on the guitar. You won't be able to do a lot of really fancy finger work, with the either hand. So yeah, I was just I thought it'd be better, naively, I think, or just disappointed that I wasn't better. Not that I thought I would be. I was just disappointed. But I really made an effort to go back to content that I loved, to try to find content that I really liked. I started watching the Luna YouTube channel videos. And so Luna is, for those of you in the dark, Luna is a really popular Korean group. They're very popular overseas, in the US and around the world. Not quite as popular in Korea, but they're fairly popular there. So they have 900 videos on their YouTube channel. Most of them are about 1 minute long. And I watched every single one of those, and I loved every minute of it. Literally every minute. But because they're a minute long, right? But it turns out that I had been avoiding content like that because I was trying to focus on I don't know, unfun content that I thought would help me get better. But it turns out watching 900 minutes, or actually probably even more than that, because some of those videos are longer. It turns out watching that much of fairly comprehensible content, you actually make a lot of progress. So it ended up being not only fun, but made me better. And it was like all around good. So, yeah, there's that. Let's see here. Yeah, I just focused on, and then I just focused on trying to find shows that I liked and that were interesting, and trying to find webtoons, and just trying to push through like a bit of the webtoon stuff, and had fun with it. Like, I think that's important. If you aren't having fun, the language acquisition process isn't working as well. That's a known fact with second language acquisition that like people have studied. And if you hate what you're doing every day, you're just training yourself to like hate what you're doing more. It becomes a mental habit. You associate those feelings, and the next day when you pick it up, you go, time to do the stupid stuff again that I can't stand doing. And that's not fun. That's how you fail, I think. Anyway. One of the first things, another question you asked was like, what was the first thing I tried to read? I tried to read a webtoon called Tower of God. I think maybe you just, know what I'm talking about, speaking to Biju here. And I couldn't read any of it. I tried a few months into my learning, like 2 months in. I couldn't understand enough of it to follow any of it. I didn't understand the conjugations. I hadn't covered enough of the grammar. I didn't know any of the vocab. It had some pictures that I could follow along with, which is not enough. And yeah, it was just hard. So I stopped. And I just kept working. I just kept working on other things. I kept working on stuff that was a little bit more fun. Shows, learning vocab from shows and subtitles helped carry me on to the point where I could do webtoons more. So, next question. We're going to be wrapping up these questions soon. God, this is a long video, isn't it? From Okchamse, I'm betting that's a bird from Se. I don't know what type of bird that is, but maybe she will enlighten us in the comments or on Discord. Okay, she says, I don't know how to phrase it, but are there activities you feel you found more benefit to compared to other type of activities? And if so, do you feel like it's a personal thing, or do you think some generalities can be drawn from experience? Yeah, so the first thing I would say is that doing pre-made decks after the beginner phase, I think for most people are probably going to be boring, I would guess. And that if you're trying to do it for the gains, then it's not really going to work as well as if you actually enjoy it. But if you do enjoy it, by all means, keep on trucking for a little while longer. Maybe learn, a couple thousand words with pre-made decks. But after that, yeah, definitely just there's no reason to. Yeah, I think, of course, like, reading is good. I think everybody agrees that reading is good. And that, I think reading subtitles, getting practice reading subtitles is good. I don't know. I forgot exactly where I was going with it. The next question was also your experience of tracking and what has changed in how you track your activities. And how do you feel it influenced your relationship with Immersion? I do think this is a good question. About 6 months in or so, I tracked things for a week and just tried to see what I was doing, how much I could do. And it was good to see like what my process was like and how many hours I was actually getting in. But then I stopped because I thought, well, I saw how much I'm doing. I was just doing as much as I could anyway. But then at about the 10-month mark, I was getting more curious and I was getting a lot of my process together and I wanted to really make things glue together. So I started tracking for more accountability and to to push forwards on the types of activities that I knew were going to be most beneficial for me. I wanted to boost my reading. And I found that it did help me like stay on task more. And then also when I was switching tasks, it helped me, like when I got bored of one thing or when I was done doing it, it helped me like move on to the next task faster than before. Like sometimes I would have down moments where I'd kind of, read Discord or do whatever. But that helped me like really just think like, okay, well, the clock's ticking, like time to start doing something else. But one of the side effects that had was I started staying up later and later to try to squeeze out every hour of the day, every minute, and try to pump up those numbers. When I was like, including passive listening, when I was listening for like 12, 13 hours a day on some days, and then including all the reading and Anki and stuff. That was not good. So I eventually stopped tracking passive listening and just decided I'm going to do this when I can, because I believe in the power of passive listening because of how much I did it and felt like it helped me in the beginning. And then again, throughout the process, like passive listening, I think has been a good thing for me. So I stopped tracking that and just focused on like having my one goal of like 2 hours a day minimum of reading, and then just tracking whatever else I did actively. And that helped me like create a better relationship with it so that I wasn't trying to squeeze out, as many hours as possible. To the point where it interfered with my sleep, which would mean I would eventually crash a little bit, like have to like catch up on my sleep. So yeah, there was probably a couple of other questions on Discord, but this, I didn't quite get to them. This video has been long enough. I wanted to just say a year is a long time, but it's not long enough to learn the language fully by any means. I have a lot of work to do, but I'm feeling really good about where things are. I'm able to learn a lot from reading Harry Potter right now. And in the shows, I've since, after watching all of that Pokemon and Avatar and some other stuff, and watching a lot of comedy Big League on YouTube and things like that, and movies. I started watching some movies recently. I started getting back into full dramas, and they're a lot easier. They're more comprehensible, so I'm getting more benefit out of them. And this just feels like the sweet spot. It's just starting to be fun. I'm able to enjoy the content and focus more on the quality of my enjoyment, rather than just if it's comprehensible. I'm taking a little bit of a step away from high school web dramas, for 13-year-old Korean girls. They were good help to get me down the road, but I think I'm glad to take a break from watching those and get some more interesting content. I think this is about where I need to leave the video. It's been a long one, but if you're really that interested in like the whole journey for the year and like what I've been up to and my thoughts, I think I tried to cover everything. My voice is going to go if I keep on talking anyway, and I've got to go study some more. I've got to do my laundry also, and I have some other things to do. So hopefully you enjoyed that. If you want to see more content, I may start doing more YouTube content in the future, but I'm not quite sure yet. It depends on where my comprehension is at with Korean, I think. I need to work on that more. So that's my main focus, working and doing my Korean. But we'll see what the future entails. If you want to see more videos in the future, more updates, please subscribe and click the like button to let me know that it was too long. And until then, I guess I will catch you guys all later. I hope you have a good time immersing. I hope your language learning goes well, and I hope you have a beautiful time learning languages. So later.